Hello Year 5 and welcome to your next science lesson. So before we have a look at our topic for today, we're going to do some retrieval practice. So look at the position of the Earth in relation to the Sun. Do you think you can identify the season? Okay, so here you can see you've got the red triangle. Okay, so we've got facing towards the Sun. And here you've got the bottom of it facing away closer to the Sun as well. So pause the video and have a think. Do you know what season this might be? Okay, so when it's tilted towards the Sun, we know that that location must experience summer. Okay, so we know because it's inside this northern hemisphere here, between the two hemispheres, it's pointing towards the Sun, it's got to be experiencing the hot weather. Now, if this side is experiencing the hot weather, we've got our yellow triangle over here, which is going to be on the opposite side. So what season do you think it will be in the southern hemisphere where this yellow triangle is? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, so because it's the furthest away from the Sun, this must mean it'll be winter. So obviously if one half is in the summer, that means the very opposite side has got to be in winter, because obviously it's going to be the furthest point away from the Sun. Okay, well done if you got that correct, because that was quite difficult to catch on from last week. So today we're going to be looking at what the different phases of the moon are. Now this might get a little bit complicated because sometimes it's easier to be doing this at school where we can have lots of demonstrations, okay? But we're going to go through it step by step and then you're going to have a go at one of the activities at the end. So, when was the last time you saw the moon? Pause the video. How would you have described what you could see? Okay, so when we look out at the sky at night, the moon doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's getting bigger, sometimes it looks like the shape is getting smaller. So as the moon orbits the Earth, so when it moves and rotates, obviously we see it very differently in the sky. What do you notice about the changes here? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, so now my question to you is it the moon? Does the moon change shape? Okay, you're absolutely right. The moon in itself doesn't actually change shape. Now, we know from our first lesson that it's a spherical shape, roughly, okay? So as a shape, it doesn't change, okay? What changes is the part of the moon that's actually lit up by the Sun as it orbits, okay? So that just means that we only see the bit that's lit up, but that doesn't mean that it's changed shape. It just means that the rest of the moon that we can't see is just hidden in a shadow. Now, hands up if you think that the moon is a source of light. Okay, so if you put your hand up, actually the moon isn't actually its own production of light. The light actually comes from the reflection from the moon, from the Sun. So when the Sun shines on the moon is actually reflective. So that's how it then bounces off that light, making it look like it actually gives off light. Because when we go out at night time, we can see because of the moon. But actually, we can only see because the Sun is reflecting on the moon. And obviously, that reflection comes down to us on Earth. So actually, we've learnt two things there. That the moon doesn't change shape itself, but also that it's not its own natural light source either. So those are two important things to remember for today. Now, when the moon orbits Earth, we know it moves in an anti-clockwise direction. So it goes backwards. So imagine a clock. Rather than going from 12 o'clock and going round to 1, 2 and 3 o'clock, it's going to go backwards, so anti-clockwise. And obviously as it orbits, we actually get to see the different parts of the moon. So the moon's phases will slowly change. Okay, it starts from being fully lit. And then as it starts to go round, you can see that the lit part of the moon gets smaller and smaller until we get about halfway through the cycle when actually we don't see much of the moon at all. But then we start to see a little bit more of the moon as we start to go back round to the end of our cycle before we go back to a full moon. Now this usually takes around 28 days or a lunar month, okay, so lunar, so moon, lunar month to actually complete. So for it to go through a full cycle from start to finish all the way around takes about 28 days. So the Sun's light always lights up the half of the moon facing the Sun. So whichever side is in front of the Sun, so between the Sun and the Earth, that's the bit that's going to be lit up. So if you looked at the moon from the arrow where we are on Earth, what do you think we're going to see? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, well you'd be right. So if we looked at the moon from this position, we're not going to see anything because the Sun's directly behind it, which means it's created a shadow. So actually we don't see very much of that moon, okay? So that part becomes completely in shadow. Now this is what we call a new moon. So the part of the moon that's shown in red, which is on the other side, okay, that's the bit we can't see. That's the bit on the other side of the moon, even though it's completely fully lit up by the sun, because it's exactly halfway between both of us. It's completely blocked us out, so we actually can't see that side. Now, as the moon moves around its orbit of the Earth, it travels around, we then start to see different parts of the moon, okay, which are lit up. So let's imagine now we can see everything within inside this yellow line, okay? So if we're looking at the moon now, we see obviously this much in shadow, but do you think we might see any of the moon lit up? Yeah, you're correct. So we call this phase a waxing crescent, okay? Now a crescent, when we call a crescent moon, is that shape. It's almost like a banana shape, okay? But this is when we actually see the right part of it here, okay? So the lit up part of the moon slowly grows as the moon completes its part of the orbit. So we start to see more and more of it. Now, when this lit up section gets larger, we say the phases are waxing. Okay, so when it's waxing, it means that we're seeing more and more and more of the moon. Okay, lots of vocabulary to remember for today. So, which of these moon phases would you see when the moon is in this position? So here we are, we're looking directly at it. Okay, we're moving in this direction. So which moon do you think we can currently see? Is it A, is it B, or is it C? Ah, well done, year 5. Okay, so actually we'd see half of the moon. Okay, so we'd only see that first half. Okay, because the shadow on this quarter of the moon we actually can't see. Okay, but obviously we can see the lit up half of it here. So one way or another we can see half of our moon. Okay, now the other half of the moon we actually can't see at the moment. So we can see one half that might be in shadow we can't see. Two quarters that makes the half there that we also can't see. So we can actually only see 1/4 of the moon at that point in time because the sun's coming from this direction. Okay, so when we only see that first quarter there, okay, that phase is known as the first quarter, and that's because we can only see 1/4 of the moon at that point in time. So in this position, in the moon's orbit, we can actually see more of its lit up side here. Okay, so we can see more of the lit up side than we can of the shadowed out part. So this is where you'd almost see sort of 3/4 of the moon. So you can see how that shadow line just goes right across the side. So when we see most of it lit up, okay, we describe these phases as gibbous. Okay, so as this gibbous phase is still getting larger, okay, going back to the word we looked at a minute ago, what word did we describe the moon when it was getting more and more bigger, when it was getting larger? Good, it was waxing. Okay, so because it's getting larger, it's waxing, and because we can see more of the moon, it's gibbous. Okay, so this part of the moon is called waxing gibbous. Okay, remember those, keep them in your head. So waxing is when we see more of the moon, gibbous is when we also see more of the moon. Now the moon's orbit is not perfectly perpendicular. So we learned that perpendicular is where things meet. Good, okay, it meets at a right angle, okay? So because it's not perpendicular to the Earth's equator, obviously we know it tilts slightly, which means that most of the time the sun's light can still reach the moon, okay? So it's not completely blocked by the Earth. So if you look at the moon from the arrow here, what do you think you could see, okay? What would this phase be called? Ah, okay, so the diagram shows the moon's position where we see the full moon. So we see the entire full surface all the way around the front. This is what we call a full moon. So full moon when we have all of it, new moon when there's none of it, okay? Now we can see the entire lit up side, okay? Now, there's lots of suspicions and superstitions that go around full moons because in past times, there are lots of people in societies that thought that going out on a night where it was a full moon, okay, was either going to result in very good things happening or very bad things happening. And they always used to say sometimes if you see a full moon and a black cat, you know that something horrible might go wrong. But I'm not that superstitious, so it's entirely up to you. But the full moon is when we can see the entire surface of our moon, okay? Now, so far we've learned that we've had the waxing. So we've had a waxing moon where we see some of it. We've then had the waxing gibbous, where we've started to see more of it, but it's still getting bigger. And then we've had our full moon. Okay, so we've gone from new moon, so no moon, a little bit, so waxing, more of it, so waxing gibbous, and now we've gone to a full moon. Now, as it then completes its orbit, it's going to go through exactly the same stages, but the opposite way around. Okay, so rather than going from waxing gibbous, okay, we're going to go from a waning gibbous and a waning crescent. So we have waxing crescent and waxing gibbous, which is where they got bigger and bigger. But then we have a waning gibbous and a waning crescent when it starts to get smaller again. So it's basically exactly the same pitch of the moon, but we then work our way backwards. Okay, so because it's then getting smaller, okay, we use the phrase waning. So waxing, larger, waning, good, waning is smaller, okay. So do you think you might be able to label those 3 phases there? Pause the video and just have a think. Okay, so here we had our half moon. Okay, so this is where we had our half moon, but we know it's getting bigger. Okay, so we know when it was getting bigger, okay, or we go from the opposite direction, we had our waning gibbous. Okay, so now it's getting smaller in this direction. And even though now it's only half moon, it's getting even smaller again. So now we've hit what we have our waning crescent. Okay, so crescent, remember, is like our banana shape. So well done if you labelled those correctly, because it's a lot of vocabulary to learn today. So let's see if you can have a go at doing it yourself. Now, what I might suggest is to watch this video again, because there's lots of vocabulary to understand. But we know that we have our new moon. So we have no moon at all. We can't see it. We then have our waxing crescent. So it's getting bigger. But then it gets even bigger, so we have our waxing gibbous, okay? Once we get to our waxing gibbous, we then get to the moon where it's then a full moon. And then we start to work our way backwards. So we go from a waning now, so we've gone from waxing, which is bigger, to waning, which is smaller, okay? So we go from a waning gibbous, and then we go from a waning crescent, so it gets smaller. So if you think you might need some extra help, pause the video and go back and rewatch this little bit about the different phases of the moon. If not, let's see if you can plough on and have a go at our activity. So along the bottom of your sheet, so I've attached 2 sheets for you to have a look at. So you've got your main worksheet here, and you've got to label the different stages of the moon. Okay, so you've got all of the words down here that you're going to need. You also have a strip, okay, of the different phases of what the moons look like. Now I've given you 3 so that you can have a go at doing it again if you happen to make a mistake. Now, if you don't have access to a printer, that's fine, because what you can do is you can draw the pictures into your book, okay? Because all you need to do is trace around something, circle, and you can use your pencil to shade in the different phases of the moon, okay? So what I like to do is I like to pause the video. I'd like to go off and have a go at this activity, rewind it if you need to, and then I want you to come back because we're going to have a little bit of a chat to see what you've learned about. Okay, so pause the video and have a go. Okay, so we've mentioned before that the moon's orbit of Earth is slightly tilted. Okay, so we know that the moon's orbit and the way we are is tilted. So because it's tilted, the orbit can vary in a few degrees. So whether it's north or whether it's south in relation to where the Earth is. So here you can see at the moment it's down in the south, okay? So sometimes the moon's orbit will actually cross across the orbit. So actually going from the north, from the south, and it will start moving up towards the north, okay? Now as that happens, it comes directly in between the Earth and the sun, which means it completely blocks out all of that light, and that's how we get that shadow, okay? But it only happens on specific locations on that planet, okay? Now, you might have seen one of these before. They're not very common, but what we call them is, it's a very fascinating phenomenon, and a big word, called a solar eclipse, and that's where the moon moves across the front of the sun. So when this happens, we can see the shadow of the moon moving across the shape of the sun. And because it can block out the sun totally, which rarely happens in each location, it completely blocks it out. So here you can see the moon starting to cross over the sun. And here you can see it's completely covered up the moon altogether. Now, it's very important if you're ever looking at a solar eclipse not to look directly at it. And you can make special tools to help you in science lessons so that you can watch it. But that's what happens when a moon crosses over into a sun. Pretty fancy, isn't it? Okay. So the last total eclipse happened back in 1999, and the next one probably won't even happen until 2081. Okay, so Have a go with your tasks and let me know how you get on. Okay, good luck.